our county leadership series. And tonight's webinar is in relation to governance. So I do get all the good webinars to give to you and to present to you. But look, the area of governance, people might think of it and go, oh my goodness, it's a paper exercise. But I suppose governance is very much to the fore and very much even in the news. About corporate governance and how it's run. It's the same governance, same principles apply across the board in terms of what I'm going to be presenting tonight. I'm Paula Prunty, the Operations and Planning Manager at the LGFA, for any of you that don't know me. And I'm also joined tonight by Lynn Savage, who is going to be literally hiding in the background, but will answer any questions or ask any questions as you arise.
I'll ask your questions, Paula.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks a million. Okay, so we're going to start and kick off in relation to governance. And look, throwing that Wordle up there to you, just so you can see, there's loads of different words. If I asked you all about what comes to mind when you think of governance, okay? And there's various different things. You'll see policy, risk management, compliance, audit, password findings, practices, okay? So loads of different words that it encompasses. And tonight we're going to try and just break that down, very much using the governance code and the governance code for sport. So I suppose, what is governance? And to me, there's like three definitions up there. But to me, if anyone ever says to me, it's how you do your business, it's how you run your county board, it's how you run your affairs, okay? So what way do you do it? And very often, if any of you ring me in relation to particular queries, I will come back to what your process or what your procedure was in relation to something. And very much that's governance. Governance is putting processes, putting procedures in place to ensure everything is run effectively and to ensure that it's run the same in the county, regardless of who's the chairperson, regardless of who the secretary is, or regardless of who the executive is made up of. We have a process and we have a procedure, and that should be set, and that's how something should be run within the county on an annual basis. Really, it's just whoever is actually administering that and facilitating that process for you. So I suppose the bottom one there is really an effective to sport, is how we run our sport, make decision and ensure it is properly accountable. So everyone tonight is from a county executive role, and you're the executive who's been tasked with running the county on a day-to-day basis in between the county board meetings. But you are accountable to the clubs when you go to a full county board meeting in relation to the actions, in relation to decisions that have been made or that you are putting to them. They've given you that power to run the county board on their behalf, but it should be done effectively, and it should be done in compliance with governance. The governance code then is a voluntary code of practice for good governance sporting bodies. It's aimed at all boards and anyone who is responsible for good practice. And really that is another word for it in governance, is the good practice. They are good practice. People are like, why would we do it? Because it is good practice. It is the recommended practice. And it's also, many times, it is the right thing to do. And we'd always say that should be a stop and an alert for people. If there's something and you feel that this is just not right, then you can guarantee then there is something not right, something that you might need to look at, some step in the procedure or the process that maybe, have we skipped something, have we missed something, and you go back and you start the process and you cover off that step that you did miss. Okay, so a lot of the time that is your testing point, is it the right thing to do? Why adopt it? It helps your committee, it helps you to set and achieve goals. It'll provide evidence to show how your committee is performing. It increases transparency, so everyone will know how you're running the county board. And I think that's one big thing clubs value, is a county board who really outlines everything they're doing, how they're doing it, why they're doing it. And it makes for a much more efficient and effective running of a county board, because nothing's coming as a surprise to the clubs. They're fully aware of everything that's there, even if it's something, if we took, for example, where a county might be financially in trouble, they're having difficulties, that should be very transparent by the financial report that's coming along, and something that's being raised at a county board meeting in relation to it. you then be coming maybe with different fundraising things, rather than suddenly walking into a county board meeting and going, we are so many thousand in the red and we're not sure how we're going to continue operating. So that's not good transparency, not good financial reporting, and we'll be looking at that as well as one of the key steps in governance. It also helps you to manage risks, okay? So it allows you to identify what are the things that we have to manage this year, what's coming up, what could be a potential risk, how are we going to overcome that? Look, all risks can't be avoided, but you can put something in place to manage it, to monitor it, and to be able to report on how you are managing that risk. And also the other side of the governance code, it can help you to reduce your costs, because if you are running effectively, if everyone knows exactly what their roles is, if you have an appropriate budget, if you have a plan, then there is probably a much more effective use of the funding within your county. Okay. As I say, by all means, ask questions at any point. If there's something on the slide that I haven't gone into in detail, by all means, stop me and ask me those questions. Okay, so the key principles of the governance code, there is 5 of them. And I don't know if anyone has ever looked at the governance code, and it's quite chunky document, but they do then break it into sort of checklists. And that's kind of what I'm going to work through tonight, is each of the 5 principles, what each of them means, and what does it mean for us in a sporting context? What can we do, for example, in principle 1 to ensure we're leading the organisation or leading the county board effectively? The exercise and control, transparent and accountability. We've spoke a lot about working effectively, and then behaving with integrity. So we jump into the first one then. So the leading, okay, and leaders, and again, as all executive, you've all been tasked with leading the county board in the particular role that you're in. So it's about having the vision, the purpose, the mission, the values and objectives for the county board, okay? And very often people can say, we don't have time to plan, but I would argue against that. You actually stop, you take time, you actually plan out, even if that plan is only for the year. It'll make such a difference. It'll really guide every meeting, and it will really keep every meeting focused. Within that, it's the developing, resource and monitoring and evaluating the plan. And that's the other side. It's lovely to have a nice plan, but that's no good if that plan then is put away into the bag and is never brought back out again. The plan needs to be kept alive. And then you also need to evaluate the plan afterwards. How well did we do against the goals we set ourselves? Then you've managing, supporting and holding the volunteers to account, all who act on behalf of the organisation, okay? So like that within your plan, who is responsible for each of the goals of the objectives? Who are you going to give that to? And then each of them is responsible for reporting back on their part of the plan. So not only are you holding volunteers to account, but you're also getting ownership there across the executive for everyone to own their part of their plan, and for you have the common goal of achieving the plan and bringing the county to a better place. So that also helps in terms of leading your county board. So the vision is very simple, where you want to go. The mission is why the county board exists and who it serves. And this is probably something as well that I think very often we do need to stop and think about, is why are we here? What are we doing? And really simply, you're here to provide football for young girls within your county. So what we're currently discussing, or what we're currently arguing about or fighting about, is that really serving that mission? Are we really providing football for girls in the best possible way that we can? And sometimes I think if you can bring yourself back to focus on that, it can very much bring us all back to the table and make us realize, yeah, okay, we've been arguing about something way over here, which is really not for the betterment of anybody. So sometimes, even if we chair people on the call tonight, that's a really good one to bring it back to why we exist. Why is this county board in place? The other side to that is about the goals and the tasks required to achieve your goals. To have second screen. The written plan will remind the committee of the role. As I said, I think it's really good to have a plan that helps to motivate people, keeps you focused. And I said as well, I think it gives ownership to the whole county board. Sorry, my screen has frozen now. You can consult with the clubs to devise the plan, and very often we've done that in conjunction with some county boards. And again, it gives the clubs that ownership. They fed in, you've listened, you put the plan in place, and then at county board meetings, you're feeding back to the clubs in relation to the progress you've made. And maybe you've also gone out to them to say, look, there was a key part of the plan. We're looking for expertise now within the county in order to help us, and you're setting up a working group for that particular part. So it keeps everyone involved. And then to reporting the progress and to review, because very often we can set a plan, something happens a couple of months into it, and we do need to maybe go off in a different way, take a different angle at something, or we have to go out and around to come back in again because we're missing a chunk. So never be afraid to deviate, but you deviate off that plan if it's for the best thing to do, because maybe other information or something else has come to light in order to, that is required in order to achieve that particular goal. Okay, principle 2 is exercising control over the organisation or over your county board. This is identifying and complying with any relevant legal and regulatory requirements. So there'll be things like your safeguarding, data protection. The next one then is in relation to your internal financial and management controls. And then it's also about identifying the major risks for the county board and deciding on the ways, as I said, to manage the risks. You can't always eliminate the risks, but most risks need to be managed. And look, again, going back to our mission, why we exist to provide football. We are working with numerous players, we're working with numerous volunteers, we're working with numerous parents, all of that in any equation. There are numerous risks that you could identify, but the key part in terms of governance is identifying what those risks are and what are we doing in order to manage them? What are we doing in order to ensure the game that we're providing is as risk-free as possible, and how we can ensure that it is a safe environment for all involved. So if we look at establishing effective controls, first of all, the rules of the association, and as you all know, my official guide is never very far from me. So that's first and foremost, what does our official guide say? What's the rules around that? And as I would often take calls and I might talk about the rule and they were like, oh, what rule's that? Okay, so people might even ring us before you've even picked up the rule book to see is there a rule that governs your query. So first and foremost, we need to be aware of that. Then we have any legislative requirements. And as I said, I've mentioned data protection, I've mentioned safeguarding. There's obviously financial legislative requirements as well that's in place. So it's important that, excuse me, you're aware of those. Everyone is responsible. Everyone's responsible for their own data protection. Sorry, I'm just take that one. Everyone has to ensure you're managing your data correctly. Everyone should have their own data inventory that is updated and kept up to date. And very often county boards will go, what data do we have? So we don't have any data. I would argue you've lots of data. You have things like injury fund claim forms coming through the county board. You've referee report forms coming to the county board. You could have CODA cases which should be coming through and the county board via the CODA officer. So each of the individual officers, a PRO, will have access to social media. You'll have children's officers who may have access to the county teams. You'll have this county secretary who has probably access to all the contact details for all your county teams. So there's lots of data there. It's how is it managed and how is that controlled? Appropriate financial controls in place. So this comes down to your county treasurer. And I know as well, a lot of work has been done with Barbara in relation to county treasurers, the support, the templates that's been available to them. And really, it often helps if you have a treasurer who is actually from a financial background, who works in this and who's fully aware of the legislative requirements around that. You need to have regular and comprehensive reporting, and that in particular is in relation to your finances. That should be on every agenda. There shouldn't be any county board agenda, be it your executive or your full county board, that a financial report is not included on. That is critical and that is essential, and also adds to the transparency. Effective budgetary control. So what is your budget? Have you sat down and done your budget? for each of the areas, for everything that you encompass, because again, doing a budget, you can see any risks. Are we down a sponsor? Do we need to do increased fundraising? Where are gates down? How can we look at driving attendances to the games? The other side is the budget. When you have that budget, do all the officers, are they all fully aware of what that budget is? Are our county managers all aware of what their budget is? So there's no point in the treasurer having a nice budget and that, but also people need to be aware of it. It needs to be brought to the executive, and it also needs to be a realistic budget, okay? And we also need to have that contingency plan in place. So really important to have effective budgetary controls in place. And then to have clearly understood and observed decision-making procedures, okay? So if a decision has to be made, for example, if your county under-16 management team want to do something, how do they, and they want to spend money, they want to buy maybe new kit, how do they go about that? What is that procedure? Who do they liaise with? Do you have to get tenders? Have you a particular preferred supplier? Who's the sponsor? Is there a long-term agreement in place with the sponsor? Can the under-16 management team go off and get their new sponsor? Okay, a lot of this seems really obvious, but it's not until something happens. So the under-16 manager does go off, gets a big sponsorship deal, but they're not aware that there's a 5-year deal in place with the current sponsor. Okay, so all of that is their procedures, their decision-making, but they need to be documented in terms of what your expectation is, even what your expectation of your managers is, how they make those decisions, how they report back to, if they do need to change something, if a budget has been agreed with them and they want to update that or amend that, how do they go about that? How do they liaise with you? Who do they liaise with on the county board? And the thing I think with decision making at a county board, the more informed you can be in making that decision, the better the decision will be. Okay, so as I say, the more up to date your financial reporting is, the more up to date that you're aware of what's incoming and outgoing, what you're waiting on to pay, and the more information you have at hand, the better you'll be in a position to make the right decision for the county board. Principle 3 then is being transparent and accountable. This is massive. I would sum the whole of governance into this one principle. And I think if you can nail this one, I think some of the rest of them even the first two I've gone through, this here is even obvious, because being transparent and accountable really relates back to your financial controls. So this is identifying those who have a legitimate interest in the work of our association or stakeholders and making sure there is regular and effective communication with them. Responding to stakeholders' questions or views, encouraging and enabling the engagement of those who benefit from our association in the planning and decision-making process. So I suppose if I said to you, who are your main stakeholders, I'd be hoping you're shouting at the screen, clubs. Okay, the clubs and our members are at county board level, our biggest stakeholders. Okay, and if I asked you then what's your communication plan with your clubs, what would you answer me? Okay, is it regular monthly county board meetings? Do you have any other form of communicating with your clubs? Do you do an update after a county board meeting for clubs who weren't in attendance? How do they find out what actually happened at that county board meeting? Yeah, word of mouth, but how do they actually find out the fact of what happened at that county board meeting, or what decision was actually made? Okay, so some things to consider in terms of transparency and accountability. As I say, the clubs make up the majority of the county board. So allowing our members to have a voice in the county. So the engagement, how do we engage our clubs? Okay, are your county boards meetings run as a case of it's the top table do all the talking, the people down the floor listen, they go home, they report back? Or is it a case of the top table may put things to the floor then there's an open dialogue, there is open engagement, or there's actually suggestions and guidance, I suppose, coming from the clubs as well in terms of what they've done, what they've tried, what they feel is for the betterment. So clubs and members need to have confidence in the committee. So again, that goes back even to one of the very first things, like the plan. You have a plan, you've consulted with them, you're progressing on it. That in itself can allow clubs to have confidence in the committee because they can really see what you're saying you're going to do, you actually are doing. And the other side, that to gain confidence in the clubs is that you are true to your word. What you say you're doing is what you are going to do. See the frog in my throat tonight.
Typical.
Apologies. Sorry?
No, always at the wrong times as you.
I know, exactly. Yeah, so I was just like, I didn't cough all day long. So going back to our clubs and that confidence, it's really important. And it's very often when you see things going pear-shaped within a county is when the floor has lost that confidence in maybe the executive, or one or two decisions just have not been followed through on that, and they can't see that level of progression. So it's really important that, as I say, you keep the clubs informed, you engage with them, you listen to their advice. And look, it's not always easy to maybe hear criticism from the floor, but maybe sometimes we do need to be able to sit back, analyze the criticism, and see, is there something? It mightn't all be something we can take on board, but maybe there is something there that we can tweak. And very often, if I would say to people, if there is stuff or people are criticizing stuff, you throw it back. Well, what do you propose? What are the suggestions? Okay. Because as we say, yes, you're the executive tasked with running the county board from day to day. However, as a whole, all the clubs, everyone is responsible for the direction that the county is going in. Conflict resolution plays a vital role, and with the code of rules now in place where required. But I would be the first to say the code of rules is not always the first option. There are other ways of resolving conflict. For a very simple one, sitting down and talking about it. Okay, sitting down and trying to understand where the conflict has come from. And most conflict arises out of a miscommunication or a disagreement in opinion, but disagreement in opinion doesn't always have to end up in conflict. Okay, people can think various different things. Going back to our first slide about the mission, why are we here? We're here to provide football. So which of those will be the better option for that? Where does it relate back to our plan? Where does it fit into our plan? All of those things can help guide us when conflict arises. Okay, and going back to our communication plan, when was somebody informed about something? So as you can see, all of these things knit together, and they knit together in terms of process and procedure. So if that's followed, there should be less conflict, or the conflict, if it does arise, should be more easily resolved because of all the various steps we have put in place. In terms of the regular updates, accurate minutes, which are open and accountable. And again, going back to our conflict, if something was already discussed, decided, and voted on at a previous meeting, then those minutes are really important, because very simply by pulling them out, confirming this was discussed, this was the decision, this was voted on, conflict's over then. Unfortunately, someone didn't agree with that, but that was the decision of the meeting. So that's full stop, end of story. Even if someone wants to continue it, there is no point in continuing it, because the decision has been made, and the clubs, the community, have already made their decision on it. And going back to our previous slide, that decision was informed, you had all the information you required, and it was an evidence-based decision that was made at the time. You had all the information to hand. And effective meetings, it is encouraging discussion. Look, we all like to go to a meeting, we're in the door and out the door within an hour. That's great. But again, taking the ownership, making sure the clubs realise they have the ownership, yous are the stewards who act on behalf of the clubs, and who act on, I suppose, their requests, their decisions that are made, you go off and act on that. So the more encouraged discussion making you have, or discussions that you have at your county board, the more effective those meetings will have as well. And it's great to have people not afraid to speak, not afraid to speak up. Or there's nothing worse than you have the meeting, you're walking outside, or you're having that cup of tea, and somebody says something to you that's really applicable, a really good, valid point, but they didn't speak up in the meeting. Okay, and that's what you want to encourage. Everyone should be able to speak regardless of what their views or regardless of what people might think of them. It's better for them to raise it in the meeting than outside afterwards. Principle 4 then is working effectively. So it's making sure that our individual committees understand their roles, their legal duties, their delegated responsibility for decision making. Okay, making sure as a board we exercise our collective responsibility through the committee meetings that are efficient and effective, and we make sure there's a suitable committee recruitment, development, and retirement processes. Okay, I'm sure you're all laughing at that, but a big thing is succession planning. And again, very often we can see county boards when there's a mass exodus of very key officers within it, and then new officers come in and really there's been nothing left for them, but they're starting nearly anew. Okay, and our counties are now so big, there's so much going on there. We really can't afford for that to happen. We need that there are the process procedures. You need to have that proper succession planning. Again, going back to our mission as to why we exist to provide that football. So ensure that there is no gap, to ensure that that doesn't fall down. We need to have, it's our duty, and I would say that to all of you, your duty as your officer is to ensure when you go in, you're leaving it in a better position than when you received it. And some of you may be saying, well, I received it in a very poor state. There was nothing for me when I come in. I appreciate that. But to me, if you're doing your role, you will be leaving that role in a better position to when it was given to you. And you would think, how would I want to hand this over to somebody? That's the way we need to be thinking. And again, going back to our duties and being able to take that responsibility for why we are in our position that we're elected into, and how can we ensure that everything we do is more effective and more efficient when we leave that post. Okay. So working effectively, it's the competent committee with a clear goal, and this where you look to the chairperson. Okay, and going back to the first one in relation to our plan, what is our goal, our plan, our mission? What are we setting out this year to achieve? And again, I'd pose to many county boards, if you were to do one or two things differently this year that would make your working as a committee better, which would make football within your county better, what would those two things be? And then go after them. They're our goal for this year. If it's even to, I don't know, increase attendances at your county finals, okay? That's your goal. Go after that goal. Everything else, because we have to keep working away on all the other day-to-day stuff. But there's our goal. We're going to go after it. What are we going to do? But you're starting that now and you're planning for it. You're making sure everything's in place. You're having a working group if that's what it takes, okay? So I would say the chairperson drives that. The chairperson should be driving you as a committee to be as effective as you can. The right people in the right role. I'm sure if any of you are talking to any of us, any of you attend any of our other webinars in relation to each role, it's so obvious, but yet it doesn't happen. But also when you get those right people in the right role, it's amazing how more effective you are automatically, okay? And that they come from the required skills. Now, I would also say that if you can get the right person with the right attitude and the right enthusiasm, and with all the training and supports that we have available now, they can learn the role and adapt into that role. But they need to have the enthusiasm and they need to be willing to be part of that group and be willing to learn and get the required skills if that's what's required from them. Evaluation of the committee's performance. It is really key, and I don't know, chair people, any of you that have stayed on and are not new to the role, have you sat down with your executive and went, right, how did last year go for us? Okay, sometimes we get to the end of the year and we're like, thank goodness that year's over. Right, let's go. Let's move on to the next one. But I would argue it's very hard to move on to the next year without looking back. And as I say, picking those one or two things that we definitely need to do better this year and putting them on the agenda, putting a plan around them and making them come alive. Because if not, you'll go through the whole year again. You'll get to the end of it and go, oh yeah, those 1 or 2 things that were so painful again. We didn't address them. Yeah, we left it too late. We should have. Oh, we'll just have to keep plowing on. And sometimes we're also guilty of that. It's like that dripping tap, and you're looking in my own house here that keeps dripping. You keep going, oh yeah, I will fix it, but I don't. Okay, so it's really important that you do address those dripping taps, we'll call them, and that you can put a plan in around them as to how you're actually going to overcome them. The role descriptions in place for each officer and what's expected from them. So again, I've already alluded to, we have a very clear role descriptions on the website. We have various webinars to support them. We will now have our administrator pathway coming. So there is lots of support for officers in each of their roles to guide them and to help them as to what is expected from them. So I would argue these days, there's no excuse for an officer not to know what's expected of them. Yes, there may be what they don't know what's expected of them in the context of your committee and what they need to do within your county if there's no guidance. However, there's very clear role descriptions, but I'd be saying they should be taking the lead in that, leading their role and coming into you as the executive going, this is what I want to do. I think this would be really effective in this role and would really progress it forward. Sharing of the workload, again, we have our individual roles, but collectively, as I said, the executive are working on behalf of the clubs on the day-to-day basis. So it's important as well that we acknowledge the different times of the year when maybe a particular officer may be more inundated than the other. For example, even chair people, when it comes to all the finals that happens within any county, spreading even the workload of that, of people being at various games. Why should it always fall on the chairperson? It's important to share that out, that other people can assist with that. And then it's the adequate training provided. So there's the training, there's the support. Very often people would just ring and go, look, just looking for a bit of advice, or I would like to talk this through with somebody else out loud, but somebody not from in the county, just to think about it. That's our role. That's why we're there. We're there to help you. As I say, there's training, it's all there. And we do acknowledge, look, you can do the training, but sometimes what you face on the ground or what's in reality can be very different. So sometimes to link what we learned in training to what we're now facing can be difficult, but that's where we'd say always come back to the support network that you have, be it other officers, you as the executive, and put it out on the table going, I'm experiencing this, what's anyone's advice? Or as we say, you can pick up the phone to ourselves. So the last principle is behaving with integrity, being honest, fair and independent, understanding, declaring and managing conflicts of interest, protecting and promoting our association's reputation, the county board's reputation, okay? And again, this sounds so obvious, right? That everyone would behave with integrity, everyone would be honest, fair and independent. But sometimes, unfortunately, people get into roles and sometimes that can not be as obvious or transparent or to the front in everything that they are doing. So it's really important, no matter what we are doing, just because we're doing it voluntarily doesn't mean to say we don't behave with integrity. Okay, we are volunteering, we're volunteering off our time, but same principles would apply, be it when you go into your job and how you would expect people to treat you in your paid role. And that should be the same in volunteering, even more so, because they say nobody's there in a paid capacity. Everyone is given off their free time. So integrity, where do we look at? Everyone is acting for the common goal, the objective, going back to the very first slide about the mission, why we are here. You should put aside the personal views and support decisions made as an executive, okay? So when anything is being discussed, as we said, everyone should be able to contribute, everyone should have a voice around the table. However, collectively, be it 10 people sitting around that table and 1 or 2 are not fully supportive of a decision that is being made. It's important they're heard. It's important that as the chairperson, you chair that discussion, you understand maybe why they're not agreeing with it. But if the majority vote for that, then it's really important that when we walk outside that door, we are all in support of that decision that has been made. And it's not a case that 1 or 2 people are going around going, well, I don't agree with it. Don't agree with it because of X, Y, and Z. It's a collective, we're working as an executive. But I said, as I outlined earlier, and about managing risks, if you feel a decision is not sitting right with you, you also have responsibility to put that out on the table and outline why you feel the way you do. But the key part is to support decisions that are made as the executive. And then it is taking that ownership. Okay, so we have to take the ownership of this is a decision we've made. And again, going back to the informed decisions, why we're making this decision, it's in line with our plan, it's in line with our budget, it's in line with what we've communicated to the clubs and what we've agreed at the start of the year to do. That's why we are going down this line. Okay, so all of those, when you can put all those pieces together in relation to why you're making the decision, it's much easier to make that decision. And it's also much easier to stand over that decision because it's been backed by all of these previous steps that you've put in place for that decision. We're at the end of the principles, and you have kept Lynn very quiet there in the background. I'd say she's off making the cup of tea with no questions. So you have all left me, or you are furiously note-taking. Lynn, is there any questions, or have you any question to ask me?
They're still there, Paul. Anyway, that's a good sign.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, all is good. There's no questions in yet, but if they do come up, I think is a key part. But you say all of these things, they may seem obvious, as you said, but actually, like setting one meeting at the start of the year to go through these and get an understanding with your full executive could save 10 meetings of having to solve all these during the year, as you said. So, yes, it's busy time, but it's time well spent. I think you'll agree on that one, just to get them all together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes as well, the most effective of those is when you break from your regular schedule of meetings. So if you decide, right, we know we meet every Tuesday as an executive, actually next week, next Thursday, we're all going to meet, even change the venue because this is something different and we're going to do this, concentrate on this, really put a lot of effort into it. And then, as Lynn said, move forward because it will save maybe numerous meetings, but at least you'd one meeting, you threw it all out there. When we finished with a bit of lunch, actually I was talking to a club the other day and they were doing that exact thing. They had a room rented. They were all coming together, finishing with a bit of lunch. But at the end of it, they were going to have a process in place to put a plan for the club together. And I thought it was a really good idea. It was just something, it was a little bit social. It was a different venue, but it was really to allow focus and to actually concentrate on what the main task was. It wasn't to deal with any of the other club business that day. It was specifically to look at putting a plan in place, how they go about it, what they need, what do they need a budget, do they need a steering group? And that's what they were looking at on that particular day. So it was a very focused meeting. So I'll move on to the last couple of slides. If you want, you can be inputting the questions if there are questions. So support that's there for you is the volunteer code of conduct, okay? And that's part of our volunteer toolbox. All our policies, safeguarding, data protection, they're all on the website. We've officer training, which will be all linked and part of our administrator pathway. We've our volunteer support program and then the county leadership series, which you've attended tonight, and there are various parts of that, various topics to that. And as we say, we try to make these topics in particular relevant to you. They're relevant to all officers. It's not one particular officer, because I say there's collective responsibility in terms of governance. So some of the take-home messages for you: that a work plan, set of objectives, to me, it's essential for the working of any committee. And as I sometimes go, well, what would those objectives be? Going back to my drip and tap, what are those within the county that we go, every year we're going to address something and we don't? Or we could do this better. What could we do better? And how could we go after that? The transparency, well, only when everyone is fully informed can the right decision be made. And I'm a firm believer of that. Between the executive, there's no point in executive, maybe the chairperson and secretary having vital information and not relaying that to all members. And sometimes it could be, oh, well, we're not sure who we can trust, who we can't trust. If you cannot trust the executive that you are working with and the people sitting at your table, then you're not going to be effective. You certainly can't be transparent. You don't have a common goal. So that part in itself needs to be addressed. So you need to fix that before you would move on with anything else. You need to actively engage with your members at all times. As I say, with your clubs, they should be feeding in. It shouldn't all be one way. It should be a two-way process. You might have a different opinion, but everyone should have a common goal. And I think that's the main thing, and how we work around those different opinions to still achieve that common goal. Think with your county hat on, not the club hat, and really shouldn't have to say that. Like, yes, we all are ingrained in our clubs, but when we come in there, as I said, you've all been voted on, you've all have become the stewards for the county in that particular role. You have that responsibility of how you make the collective county better, not what's just going to be for the betterment of my club. Know your role. As I say, even volunteers need to be managed, and that comes back to you as the chairperson, as the executive, to manage that, to manage the plan, to manage the activity of the county board, to manage that mission of providing football to girls within your county. That has to be managed. But you can do that by knowing your role. You can do that by having your plan in place. So this is your governance checklist. Okay, looks very long. Some of you probably are already doing a lot of what's here, but very often even small things like standing orders in place for meetings, how you do that, maybe having those different engagement with members, what that's going to look like, making sure all the officers are fulfilled. This is a very simple, this is a tick the box, but then you need to go and live the governance code, those things I've just spoken about, how you do it on a day-to-day basis. And then I'll leave you with the wordle that maybe you're not as confused as what you were at the start of that webinar, and that governance might seem a bit more, what's the word, not scary, and to understand, I suppose, what it is and why it's for the betterment.
So, Paula, you have a few questions as well. I suppose before you touch on, there's two things that's fresh in my head when you were going through that as well. We did put out an email for any counties that did want to be involved in the volunteer support program. So
Yes.
any counties that are, obviously there's an opportunity of somebody working with you to try and put all this in. So the closing date of that is rapidly approaching. So just that's one thing. And secondly, obviously we've our provincial and county leadership or executive conference coming up. So the importance of engaging in that as well. So there is other aspects there too. Well, two questions for you. If you have a committee member who has taken a role but is not attending meetings, not contributing to the committee, is there a process for removing them and getting someone in who will work more effectively in the role?
Yeah, so the first thing, and when I spoke about the conflict resolution, the first step in that I would say is in relation to making contact with the person. Okay, so they've been voted into a role, but they're now not engaging. You need to be able to make some form of contact with the person to find out, are they no longer interested? Do they not want to stay on the committee? Has something changed in terms of their interest and why they're not engaging with you? When you can establish that, then the rules are there, because if they don't want to be, then they submit that they are resigning from the committee. And then there's I think it's rule 26, you can then re-advertise out to the clubs and to get nominations in for that role. But I would suggest it involves a conversation. You can't just automatically remove them. You need a conversation with them in relation to why they're not engaging.
And I think that's important, Paul, because I know we had a particular committee that was in contact last year, and somebody had pretty much disappeared. But when they did, instead of just kicking them off, instead of they made contact, and that person happened to be ill at the time. But actually, their involvement in that committee was worth more to them than anything. So instead of them being kicked off, they did build a team around them. So they were still there in name and had people to help them, but it probably meant more to that person than anything. So we can maybe not take quick fire too quickly, and understand what the reasons are. There will be some where it's just they've disappeared, but maybe just to get a bit of understanding of the human behind it. There's one more question there. Should clubs at county board meetings have the final say in decision making, or can the executive decide what they feel is best?
No, it has to go to the floor, so it has to be discussed and has to be voted on by the clubs, and the executive are part of that decision making. They have a vote as well. So depending on what that proposal is, but my thing would always be a proposal is developed, it's researched, it's informed. The proposal is put to the clubs in sufficient time that they can look at it, discuss it, and then it goes to the floor and you are discussing it. Now, sometimes I would often say as well, depending on what the decision is, something could be raised from the floor that maybe nobody has thought about, nobody has considered, and you realize, well, actually, that could have a knock on effect. Then you can go, okay, we need to take this off the floor. As the executive, we need to go back and do some more work, get more information, maybe contact Croke Park, contact the provincial council, contact somebody, and then put it back to the floor. But it would still be a decision for the clubs. The clubs make that decision. You are guided and responsible for reporting to the clubs.
Right, I think that is all your questions. You're getting away very lightly tonight. I could pick up a few more here, but I'll be cursing me tomorrow. But there's nothing else there at the minute. I think there was a lot of information on the slides, which usually is a thing. There's a lot to absorb.
Exactly, and like that, if there is, and as you say, something might come to you, by all means, feel free to contact myself or Lynn, because it'll test how much Lynn was listening to me as well tonight, so she can answer too. But by all means, please contact me. As I say, I'm a big person for procedure and process, and the more you do that at the start of the year, the more you'll be grateful for it as stuff arises throughout the year. So, as I say, you all have my email, but feel free to contact us and to run anything past us that we can help you with.
I was listening very well. Any governance was needed to contact you. So if it comes to me, I know to hit forward. That worked very well.
Brilliant. I love it.
I'll let you wrap up, Paul, and we'll be good to go.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks a million, everyone. As I say, I'd leave you with the take-home messages. Thank you for attending. And as I say, I hope you find it beneficial. And so good night, everyone. And as we say, hopefully we'll see you at our county office, our webinar or seminar coming up, or that you take Lynn up on that volunteer support program. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.